to be here and to host this, yes, indeed, this toasty fireside chat with Andrew, CEO of Britain's Most Admired Company. Andrew has been CEO of Halma for 16 years of frankly relentless profitable growth and has kindly agreed to share a few nuggets of wisdom. So thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Adam. Over to you. I think it's questions for you, I think, today.
So Halma has, I believe, around 45 companies in the group around the world, which you've described to me as SMEs, so all leading in their own area, be that fire safety, environmental, medical devices. If you don't mind me saying, the conglomerate model isn't exactly fashionable these days. So as a group, how do you keep the whole greater than the sum of its parts? And how do you make the individual businesses in Halma better because they're in Halma?
Right, an easy start of a 10. This could be a long answer. I think you have to start with the purpose of the group, the purpose of the business. And I can remember, I've been in the group over 25 years. I joined in one of the operating companies, and I think even back then we had some kind of mission statement purpose. And in those days, it was to protect life and detect hazards. And so the idea was every company in the group was fitted into one of those camps. When I took over as CEO, which was about 16, 17 years ago, I felt that although we had that statement, actually you looked around the group and not all the businesses then fitted with that. And I also felt that we were missing a little bit of ambition. So we kind of evolved the purpose at that point in time, and it turned into protecting life and improving the quality of life for people worldwide. And at that point, it just sounded like another mission statement. What was really interesting was in those first 2 years as CEO, as a result of making that change, we ended up selling a quarter of the portfolio companies because they didn't fit with it. And we also ended up changing around, I think it was about 80% of our top 200 people, because we were very much looking to grow and to build a business that was satisfying that purpose. And if you roll it forward to 3 or 4 years ago, we evolved again into a more ambitious, inclusive purpose statement, which is growing a safer, cleaner, healthier future forever and every day. So every company in the group needs to fit with that purpose. It needs to be guided by that. Every company in the group is involved in safety, healthcare, and the environment. So although we have diversity, we also have a very clear purpose, a clear DNA, a clear culture, which binds everyone together, and it drives the decisions that we make. So we only buy companies that fit with that purpose. We only if we see a company in the portfolio that's moving away from it, we'll think about, well, unless we can bring it back into line, should we think about divesting it? So it really does drive key business decisions, and that brings everything together.
I think that kind of long-term view is something that really stands out for me about Halma. A lot of people talk about playing the long game, but you really do. I'm interested in how that works in practice. Ensuring that your decisions really do align to those long-term goals. Put another way, what short-term wins do you have to say no to on a regular basis because of your purpose?
To some extent, I think we sort of say part of our DNA is to say yes and. In other words, you're not choosing between two alternatives. You try and deliver on both. You try and manage those paradoxes. I think one of the things that's really underpinned our long-term vision is that from a very early stage, we had a financial model, a growth strategy, and an organizational model, or culture, if you like, that were very much consistent with each other. And so we weren't trying to manage the trade-offs between those three things. So, for example, our growth strategy is to target market with long-term growth drivers, to target businesses that have got valuable niches in those markets. And then you think about our financial model, which was to double in size every 5 years, to do that in a self-funded way so that we can not only use the cash we generate from organic growth to buy more companies, but also to pay a regular increase in dividends to shareholders. In order to do that, we need an organizational model which gives us huge agility and flexibility, so that we've got, as you say, sort of 40, 50 SMEs. Each of those companies has an independent management team with a lot of autonomy, but also a lot of accountability. And one of the things they're doing are making sure that they're nurturing and nourishing the intellectual property in that business to generate the value through those long-term growth drivers by building strong positions in those niches. So I think that virtuous cycle, if you like, of the growth strategy, the financial model, and the organizational model supports that long-term vision. I think then what comes through that, particularly as a public company, is that if you articulate that very clearly and you start delivering against that, you basically get the shareholders you deserve. In other words, you get shareholders and investors who are aligned with what you are saying you're going to deliver. And therefore, they're supportive sometimes of you making, as you alluded to at the question, some of those short-term trade-offs against the long-term growth. I think one final thing, I remember when I took over, one of my non-executives said to me, the thing that, and the reason I took over was that the group had just stopped growing a bit organically. And he said to me that the thing this business really needs is more headroom. It needs more headroom in the way you're forecasting to the market, more headroom in terms of the talent you've got. It needs headroom so that you can fix problems when they arise and you can invest now for the next 3 to 5 years. And I've always kept that in mind, that as we grow, we've got to constantly be reinvesting within the business to create that headroom, because there are always surprises ahead, and indeed there are new opportunities ahead that you can then take advantage of.
So you're an acquisitive group, but the portfolio of businesses is kind of the same number of companies as when you joined, despite I think the market cap is 19 times higher or something.
Yeah, I mean, when I joined the group, the market cap was about 200 million. I think when I took over as CEO, it was about 500 million. And I think in this last week or so, we're just over 10 billion. So, and you're right, the number of companies in the portfolio was about 44, 45 when I took over as CEO, and we've got about the same number today. So the average size of those companies has grown, the complexity of those companies has grown. The beauty of that, however, is the complexity of almost running the group has not got too different. What has changed, though, is the way that we lead the group and the way we run the group. So there's much more scalability, particularly in the leadership in the group. And we've had to work very hard over the last 10 to 15 years to make sure that the leadership has stayed ahead of where the group is, to make sure that we can keep growing and keep running the business without starting to compromise on some of those cultural issues or those financial model growth strategy issues I mentioned earlier.
So I was going to ask about M&A, but I might just pick up on that first, actually. So I know you made some changes to the management structure. What were those changes, and how did they make the group more scalable?
Up until, must be about 4 or 5 years ago, my executive board, so CEO and the people working underneath me, were what we call the divisional CEO. So a divisional CEO is chairing a small portfolio of half a dozen companies, and they're also doing the M&A to add businesses to their own portfolio, with the oversight from the centre. And so my job was essentially overseeing the 45 companies. So to some extent, I was the chief people officer, the chief sales officer, the chief everything officer. I had to have oversight of everything that was going on. And I recognised that as we grew, we were going to start running into constraints. It wasn't possible to have 15 divisional CEOs reporting into me on my EB. It wasn't possible for them to start managing portfolios of 10 companies. So the choice was, do we fix the number of companies and just have bigger and bigger companies, or do we have some more scalability so that we could run a bigger portfolio? And I decided to basically put in place some sector CEOs to whom the divisional CEOs would report into. What was interesting there was immediately we had that change in terms of dynamic executive board. Instead of having 8 divisional CEOs, I now had, actually back then, 4 sector CEOs who were looking after a quarter of the group each. And over the first couple of years, I also realised that gave me a bit more scope to bring in real experts in talent, in digital, in technology, in legal, whatever it may be, and at the same time really transform the diversity of my leadership group. And so my job as CEO, I think, has been transformed from being quite an operational CEO to make sure that the businesses are running well, that we're dealing with problems, that we're over every detail of the operations, to leading the group through a leadership team, through a leadership board, where there's that combination of real operational expertise and accountability, but at the same time, real functional expertise. And so I've had to work harder at developing those individually, but also we work very hard to operate as a team. So we talk about the team members being deputy CEOs, if you like, rather than being just narrowly thinking about their particular functions.
So the day job's changed quite a bit then in 16 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hugely. And I've been fortunate enough to make sure I'm surrounding myself with people who I can learn from, and they've been hugely supportive in helping me transition from making that change from being quite a not directive but involved in the detail as a CEO to someone who's much more taking a strategic view, and I say leading the business through others. And I can say over the last 12-15 months, already being set up to lead the business through other people has been hugely helpful in dealing with all the complexity we've had to deal with.
So on the M&A topic again, as a group, how do you spot a good strategic opportunity? Because you're good at this.
Yeah, we try and de-risk the M&A activity, if you like, as much as we can. So we've got a few fundamental principles. Number one is, does it align with the purpose? I touched on that earlier on. So is it in safety, healthcare, and the environment? Number two, does it have the financial characteristics that we already have as a group? So does it fit within the financial model? And number three, will it fit within that organizational design? So do we have a business here that already looks like a Halma company, has got the track record of a Halma company, can deliver growth in the long term over the next 20 years, but more importantly, will then fit within an organization where they're going to have still a lot of accountability, but at the same time, they're going to be allowed to be entrepreneurial. And so one of the key things we want when we buy a business is for the management teams of those businesses to stay in place after we've acquired them, because we need their expertise, basically where they got their business to at that point in time, we need them for the future. So we're our due diligence is very often not just focused on the commercial elements, but the cultural elements. And we tend to buy businesses in and around what we already do. So we're de-risking the commercial risk by knowing the market that company operates in pretty well already, because we have a lot of companies involved in that activity. And quite often, therefore, it takes us down a path where we're buying privately owned companies, where the business owner, or it still has a substantial ownership stake, still wants to run the company after they've sold it, and see the opportunity to sell to a global group like Halma to basically give them the best of both worlds.
So you don't necessarily have to work too hard to integrate a business into the group, because you've already made sure it aligns in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a huge risk with acquisitions. When you're buying a business to transform it into something else, then you're introducing a huge integration risk, which is difficult to do. We do some of those at a very small scale. So we will buy a company that maybe has some great technology and bolt it onto one of our existing businesses. But even though they're small deals, we see them at quite high risk, because one of the dangers we've got there is that actually we destroy value in the existing business we own by introducing that complexity to it. So yeah, we do that, but we tread quite carefully when we see those opportunities.
So you mentioned about having a layer of management where they're effectively like deputy CEOs or divisional CEOs, which brings me to the subject of succession planning. I'm sure you're not going anywhere anytime soon, but you've been there a while, and it must be a challenge, because you'd be a hard act to follow. I believe you're the third CEO in 50 years. Yeah, business, yeah. And that's a pattern across the senior echelons.
Yeah, I mean, we've just recruited a new chairman, and that's our chairman. It's wrong phrase. Our chair, Louise Macon, who's our fourth chair in 50 years. Our CFO is the third CFO in 50 years, and I'm the third CEO. So you talk about a long-term view and a long-term perspective. It certainly has run through the leadership ranks. I come back to what I said about the way my job has changed. That up until 5 years ago, I was worried about succession, because that ability to lead a group in quite an operational way across 50 companies is a very tough task. I now feel as if we're building succession right the way through the organization. So, for example, we made a change 1st of April this year, where we needed to, through retirement and people leaving the group, we needed to find 2 sector CEOs on my executive board, and we were able to promote from within 2 of our divisional CEOs into that slot. We were able to then backfill one of those divisional CEO roles through our MD. So our talent function, I'd say, and the way that very much dovetails with our strategy and our growth strategy, with that view of the next 3 to 5 years, has been a huge differentiator for us over the last certainly 5 or 10 years. And the other thing I'll say is, one of the byproducts of of having a strong purpose and living up to that purpose has been the way in which we've been attracting more talent, more diverse talent into the group, and the way in which that's really strengthened the way that we've operated, but also that whole succession planning piece.
Do you try and attract talent as a group, or does it tend to feel more like each business is fishing separately?
We focus very much on what we call the top 300. So at the centre, we're providing a lot of support to the operating company boards. So when they're recruiting directors onto their boards and MDs for operating companies, and then our sector teams and obviously our group level teams, we're directly supporting that effort. So one of the things I haven't quite touched on is, I think you mentioned in your opening question, the value that we bring to companies that we own. We've got what we call our growth enablers. So we've got 6 or 7 growth enablers, and they are small central teams, maybe 5 or 6 people, globally based. And they provide, if you like, a service to the operating companies in key areas which we know SMEs struggle with as they grow over a 15-20 year period. So if you want help with your talent and your succession, if you want help with international expansion, with digitization, with innovation, with legal and risk, you want some help with anything that really drives that growth of your business over the long term, then we've either got a growth enabler within the group, or we can, typically through divisional CEOs, we can put you in touch with another group company or an external partner that can help you tackle that problem. So there's real value add, if you like, from the centre, but it's very much pulled by the operating companies according to what their needs are.
I think we may have time for 1 or 2 more questions before maybe I'll pass on to Sandra for some from the group. Is that all right, Sandra?
That's fantastic. And I know this all feels a little bit like speed dating. We have to go so quickly. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Andrew, particularly. We do have questions. Can I, Reg, if you can put a spotlight on Dominic Cheetham to raise his question. If you can introduce yourself and ask the question, that would be great.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for that. This question comes from some of my own personal experiences over the years. Companies can grow very effectively, very well for a period of time and see their valuations grow. And then something goes wrong that really hits at the reputation and destroys value pretty permanently. Does that concern, is that part of your concerns for the business, or are you protected because you are a conglomerate and you've got these multiple brands? Ultimately, the value in Halma doesn't get destroyed if something happens within one of your SMEs.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. The way I think you're right. But I think there's two elements to this. At the individual company level, you're right. You haven't got, if you like, the cross-contamination issue across the different subsidiaries, but still, there's huge reputational value and huge importance of the centre and the culture, that the example, if you like, that the centre gives to a business, and the decisions we make at the centre, whether it's capital allocation, talent allocation, can make or break the model. One of the things that we've done in the last 4 or 5 years is to articulate what we call Halma's DNA. So what are the cultural genes and the organisational genes that as we grow, we're not going to compromise on? And when we're recruiting into senior leadership positions, we're focusing almost all our effort. Once we've worked out they've got the professional confidence, we put huge effort into assessing, if you like, the cultural fit of leadership talent against the Halma DNA characteristics. So, for example, exploring the characteristics of saying yes and, managing paradox, the entrepreneurial spirit, the openness to change, living the purpose, the fact that you've got people who actually are motivated by making the world a safer, cleaner, healthier place. All of those things we spend a lot of time on when we're recruiting, and the higher up the organisation we go, clearly the most critical those characteristics are, because the effect they can have cascading down through the organisation, for good or for bad, can be quite dramatic. And I'd say over the years we've got a proactive view to talent management, so we do change people, and more often than not it will be for some of those cultural fit issues rather than the financial performance of senior leaders in the group. as causes for why we make those changes proactively. But I think we worry about that, and we manage that all the time. I think it's spot on as a key risk for the business.
Thank you for that. Aligned sort of similarly on the reputational angle, Tarquin Henderson, would you like to raise your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. It's been fascinating to hear your views. It is related, my question. It's more about, I guess, the opportunity you have to build the reputation's value through the success of your own individual brands, and how you find it easy or uneasy to associate the success of individual businesses within the group with the top tier Halma brand. How can it's almost like a sort of a halo effect, I guess. How do you manage to get the greatest value from what they're achieving, recognized at the top level through your own corporate communications? Yeah,
again, a great question, and we recognize that it's the companies who are the heroes in our group. They are the ones who build their brand in their own markets and are very well known in their own markets, and that's absolutely critical to our success. One of the interesting aspects of ESG and the way in which we're having to, if you like, dovetail ESG requirements and reporting requirements with our overall sustainable growth model is tell that story better, to actually tell the story of what the operating companies are doing to make a difference, or in terms of whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, or climate change, whatever it may be. Our ability to capture those stories and capture what they're doing, then communicating that externally is a real challenge. This coming year, we're investing in some technology at the centre, which will allow us to capture some of that information so that we can report more easily. And also in recent years, we've invested quite heavily in our strategic communication capability inside the business. And one of the key roles that small team has is to go around the operating companies, capture the stories as well as the data, to make sure that we can communicate that. Because you're right, the companies benefit from a bit of a halo effect from Halma, but at the same time, Halma's nothing without what the companies do, and we've got to continue to work hard to improve that storytelling. So I think that's a great point.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone else want to put up their hand for another final question before I pass back to Adam on this? Adam, I think maybe the last question will go to you. And your comment, Andrew, just now about the stories. In our work for Coca-Cola, we often had them talk about bubbling up the stories to bubble them out again. So the same kind of thing, and it's often an issue for large organizations. So thank you. Adam, over to you for the last closing question.
Sure. Well, Andrew, it's all been really interesting. What would you most like to be admired for?
Wow, I've never thought of that question. I mean, I suppose I quite get motivated by doing things people say you can't do. So I like that question, saying, you can't sustain growth and retain your culture and scale it up over a long period of time without somewhere along the line falling over. And I've seen that since I've been CEO of Halma as my biggest challenge of how can I capture what's made Halma a great company to get us to where we got to, and then continue to build that great business over a long period of time. And when the time comes for someone else to take over, I'm leaving them with a business which still has huge potential to carry on growing in the future. So to me, it's being able to do something that people think is difficult to do, and doing it in a way which also leaves that legacy for the future.
Can I ask another question if you'd like?
We could do that if you'd like to. Otherwise, we can happily move on to Nick. Up to you, Adam.
I'll give you one more, Andrew. Just
go on then.
Yeah, just one more. Just what's next? Because Halma's kept growing. I'm just curious how big it can get.
One of the things we've done in this last month is up until last month we had we got a safety sector, we've got a medical sector, and we've got an environmental sector. One of the things, obviously, one of the trends we've seen coming out of the last 12 months, medical is fairly obvious in terms of, some of the legacy issues there that are going to drive the growth in our business there. The environmental ones, I think, is an interesting one, because there's no doubt that climate change, the visibility of that, the importance of that is becoming increasingly recognised. So one of the things we've done in this last month or so, last couple of months, is separate out our medical sector from an environmental sector from an M&A point of view. So now we have a dedicated team focused on our environmental sector. And it'll be very interesting to see over the next 3 to 5 years some of the new niches, some of the new opportunities they see for growth, particularly from an organic growth point of view. We're already market leaders in areas such as water leak detection, water treatment, water quality testing, air pollution monitoring. But I've no doubt that there are going to be a whole heap of new niches in the future. So I'm intrigued to see how that environmental sector's growth roadmap starts to evolve over the next couple of years, now that we've got that greater focus on the group, particularly from an M&A point of view.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew, for being with us and sharing us your time
Thanks, Alan.
with investors today. So really appreciate it. Thank you.